So typically you can put an entire computer together in 3 or 4 hours in a good stretch. I'm taking my time with this one because I'm still waiting for some components to come in. But next up, what you would probably want to do is start attaching some of these internal case cables. And what we can do from here is start putting some drives in these slots. Excuse me. I had hoped to take an old DVD drive off my last computer and put it on this motherboard, but this motherboard doesn't have an IDE connection header, so I can't use it on this one. So I went ahead and ordered a new kind, which is a SATA, and I'll be plugging that in there when that gets here sometime next week. And in the meantime, I'll at least be able to finish building what I have here and at least do some power tests. Possibly get the OS going, we'll see about that. But other than that, I think that is it for this installment. So next up, we'll be having the graphics card is going in, the hard drives are going to start getting slotted in here. I got to make a couple decisions on that, which ones I'll be using. And that is it for components I have on hand, I believe, except for the power supply. We may as well do that one now. As I think I mentioned in another video, typically the power supply goes up top, way up here, and then the motherboard goes below that. This case in particular changes that around. A few other cases around nowadays do that as well. Another difference nowadays is that rather than putting the fan of the power supply on the back, a little small one, they put a monstrously huge one on the bottom. So if you are going to shop around for your own system, you do want to keep that in mind. Another thing that I'll note about some power supplies is that they're starting to go modular. So rather than have all these cables that you may never use coming out of it, they'll have a bunch of Molex ports which look like this right here on the back built in, so you can actually choose which cables you want, when and where and how you want them. So the power supply itself is really nice and easy. What we'll do here is simply drop it in place. Hopefully. There we go. So you might note this little piece of metal up here. Typically that is up top to help support the power supply's weight. One thing you want to do when you are dealing with power supply is make sure that the little red switch is, if you're in America, set to 115. If you're in Europe or most everywhere else, you probably want it at 220. Check your local country computer guide for that kind of thing. So there's 4 screws back here, and getting them to line up is being a little bit of a pain. And it turns out one of them here doesn't line up at all. Interesting. This little guy here definitely does not want to go. Let me put a little more light on the situation. There we are. Yeah. So this one fits with a little bit of a screw hole there, which is definitely odd. Sorry, I can't quite get a better angle. This is pretty much it that we're going to have to deal with here. The case comes with, or the power supply rather, comes with 4 screws. It shouldn't cause any problem as long as that latches on there. And the screws are fairly typical as far as they go. This is a fairly standard size screw that you'll find in a lot of places. So these ports back here use the very same thing. So we'll throw one in here real loose. And again, I don't want to do this tight yet because I want to draw the power supply into place by getting the screws going first. So what we'll be doing is bringing the power supply flush to the back of the case here. And then once you've got all of them in. Let's save that one for last just because it is the oddball. Before we tighten them up, I'll give the case a little push around. So it does have a little room to maneuver there. And in this case, you do want to go nice and tight with these. And if I had a different, bigger, flatter Phillips head here, I would be using that, because this one's a little too thin and long for these particular screws. Good. Nice and tight. And finally for the last one here. Nice and tight. This is one of the very few times where you want the screws to be done nice and tight. So like the hard drives, for example, you want those to be fairly loose. Or not loose, but definitely not tightly done. So this is definitely a huge amount of cables right here. I'm probably not going to use half of them, is my bet. So it's too bad, because this does take up a lot of space inside the case. This little area here might be good to stash a few of the cables in, but I've got a feeling these are going to be all over the place. There isn't necessarily any given order to how the power should go in, but typically you'd want to connect the main power board first. There's a couple different connectors for that. Let me show you around. Over here, this is probably a 24 pin. I can't quite count it. Typically these are 24 20 pins is the other option that this comes in. And typically what you can do is, there we are right there. So this end here would actually wedge off, and you'd be able to put the 20 pin in instead of the 24. There is also a little 4-pin guy up in here. There he is, nice and dead center. And sometimes there's a 4-pin Molex on the motherboard, but there doesn't appear to be in this case. And when I say the word Molex, that's basically this. It's a standard, or it used to be the standard of all standard computer connections. Nowadays with the SATA drives, or SATA, however you want to pronounce it, this is now becoming the default connector, if I can get some focus right there. So it's much smaller, conveys the same energy, it's just a different form factor. I think I've got 9 of each of those on here, so that's definitely going to be a lot. The only other special power connectors here for the graphics card, and nowadays these come in a 6-pin, like that. And you'll also notice that all of these are notched a very particular way. So the power can only fit into the box one way, and you're guaranteed pretty much of no screw-ups on that front. So this will come together fairly quickly from here. We got the motherboard, we've got the power supply. I'll probably hold off on cabling everything quite yet, and we'll go and put some hard drives in. In fact, why not just put 1 or 2 in right now?